SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello friends, you're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. If you're new to the podcast, first off, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. If you're feeling good, head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to start receiving the AOE newsletter. It's a little piece of positivity from me to you every week. Returning listeners, thanks for tuning in again. You are awesome. And for all of you, if you're feeling like a daily podcast is your thing, you'll want to check out This Day in Education. It's all about learning new things, which is just so you. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or at thisdayined.org. Today is a throwback to Season 1. My wise friend, Ashley White, and I had the chance to talk about the flipped class model. If you're working online, you really want to hear this because it's going to change how you approach curriculum planning and lesson delivery. Enjoy this encore episode from Season 1 and check back next week for an all-new episode. So, you ready? Let's relearn something new. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. I'm excited to talk with you today.
I am so looking forward to this conversation. You helped introduce flipped classroom model to me when I first came online, so I'm really excited for our listeners to hear you speak to it and explain what it is and what it can do for our classes. But before we dive into all that, how are you? Tell me something fun you and your family have been up to recently.
All right. Well, I have 3 little kids, and so we have been spending a lot of time outside, riding bikes, playing outside. We just moved into a new house a couple months ago, and so this week after work, we've been working on building a little kids clubhouse on the side of our house. So we built like a little workbench for them, and they've been busy making potions and setting up a little science lab on their bench with pine cones and beakers and bowls and things like that. So we've been trying to get outside as much as possible.
Yes, it's our saving grace during COVID times.
Absolutely.
I think it's just whatever outside space you can find, getting there. It's so good.
Yes.
Oh, that sounds really exciting. You have been busy, woman. My gosh. Moving, new place, taking care of the kids, educating the kids.
Yes.
I don't know how you do all that. That's awesome. Well, thanks again for taking time out to come and talk with me and share with our listeners flipped classroom model. I love this. Tell us what exactly is the benefit of a flipped class model. Convince me it's not a fad and just the next new thing. And can any teacher, any grade or discipline flip their online class? And then do you always flip or no? I know that's a lot, so.
Yes, teachers of all grades and disciplines can flip their class. And I'd actually say that the younger the students, the more important it is to flip. The flipped classroom model is basically the process of creating a more student-centered learning experience by reorganizing the method of how information is presented in your class. It begins with a recorded teacher-guided weekly starter video that students watch early in the week prior to class. And then students can pause and review that video as many times as they need to, and teachers can use this video for a wide variety of purposes, like just to go over what's going on in the week, preview assignments and new concepts. Teachers can show examples or even do some guided work for students just to watch.
That sounds awesome. There's a lot of potential with it then. It's not just one video for one precise purpose.
Exactly. So the teacher can use that video for whatever purpose they see fit for that week. A lot of times the purpose changes from week to week. Like if students are getting ready to learn a really complicated skill that week, it might be really important to do a little bit of direct instruction and then do some modeling with examples. But other weeks where maybe it's just a little bit of a review or something students, already are pretty good at but just need to kind of take to the next level, the teacher might just spend a short time reviewing that and then just go over the week's content, talk about what to do that week, how to turn something in, preview class, like what are students going to learn about in class so they can get excited about that.
So it sounds like this is going to free students up to apply the skills that you're showing in the weekly starter video to class later on in the week or later that day. So can you tell us more, kind of the nuts and bolts of the weekly starter video? How long is it, or should it be? Is it highly produced? Are you spending a lot of time editing it and making it amazing, or does that even matter? Can you just give us a little bit more about how you actually construct the video?
Sure, those are really good questions. Well, we all know that it's hard to sit and listen to something that's really long and complex. So the best weekly starter videos are actually pretty short. What short means really varies on the grade level you teach. I teach high school, and so the weekly starter videos that I make are usually no longer than 5 to 7 minutes max. If you're teaching a younger grade, it might need to be a little bit shorter, depending on how long they can focus on listening. In the video, I usually make some Google Slides as a visual, and I have the week's learning objectives and then whatever content I would like to do. So again, it could just be showing the starter page or whatever page the students are using to do their work. Could be showing a specific assignment. It could just be some separate information with examples so that you can do a mini lesson on a specific skill or concept as background knowledge to set students up for success for the rest of the week.
That is so smart. And I like the idea of keeping it short. One, because knowing me, I would mess it up 3 times and want to re-record. And so it's good to know I'm not trying to re-record a 20-minute long video, but a 2 or 3 or 5-minute long video. That's a lot more doable for me as a teacher. And then I really like the idea of doing some of that direct instruction asynchronously through this video so the student can watch it when they have the opportunity in that morning or that Monday, whatever it might be. And then we're working on that skill and they've already seen it, but I didn't have to use up class time for that. So, okay, I've made this great video. I think I've provided some good direct instruction. I've kept it succinct. How does that really benefit my students for the week that I've planned?
Well, it's really great because then when you see students in your live class session, students already come with some background knowledge and they know what to expect for the week. They know what skills they're learning. They're able to articulate. They've probably gathered some new knowledge about what the skill focus is. So instead of spending class time lecturing or going over assignments, that's already done in the weekly starter and it's there. It lives in Canvas or whatever platform the teacher is using. So students can always refer back to that anytime they want because that's the stuff that they usually forget. They forget the instructions to assignments. They need it.
Yes.
Talk to them, like just read to them, gone over with them. They want to look at those examples again. So instead of spending time going over things like that, the teacher has more time to actually have an interactive class session where students are working on projects, meeting in small groups, discussing, or having some sort of application activity of the skills that they're learning. So they're doing things in class. They're busy. The kids are doing the work. And then the teacher takes on the role of a coach or facilitator instead of a lecturer. The classroom suddenly goes from being teacher-centered to student-centered because the kids are the ones doing the work, doing the learning, engaging. And they just have that space and time during class to do that. Class turns into a really fun and meaningful place where students are doing the hard work of learning, which is really impactful to their growth throughout the school year.
That sounds awesome. That sounds really fun, doesn't it?
Yes.
I want to be a student in that flipped model. And I like what you said at the top of the episode too about it being really important the younger the student, because I found when I work with kindergarten and first grade, there's such a range, right? You might have some kids who are reading and some kids who are still just learning their alphabet, or some kids who are doing calculations and some who are just still working on basics and counting with their fingers, and that's fine. But to be able to provide direct, explicit instruction or a guide for the week in that quick video, give everyone what they need, and then the kids who need more support can go back and revisit that. Like you said, that video is always there, so it's not just one and done in class, or they'd have to look at a class recording and scroll through 30 minutes of data. They're just looking at this quick little video that they can pause, maybe an adult with them can jot down a note, or, whatever they might need to do. Having it be accessible for the whole week, or really term, I guess, or semester, is so cool. So this sounds super fun. Can you tell us about how this has really worked for you as a high school teacher?
Yes. So I have taught ninth grade English for the last 4 years of my career. And, 1 week I taught my ninth grade English class how to identify voice in a piece of writing and critique a writer's use of voice to the overall effectiveness of the piece. And so, ninth graders developmentally, they can totally understand what voice means. They may have heard that in English class before. It's an easy concept to grasp, but then being able to analyze a writer's effectiveness, that word effectiveness is really confusing to them. And so my skill focus for this specific week was, identifying voice and then the effectiveness. So I took something that they already kind of knew about or was easy to grasp, and then I added the next level of that for this high school level class. How I structured that in the flipped classroom model was in my weekly starter video on Monday, I did a mini lesson where I identified voice and showed some examples from different texts we read a while ago, like a couple weeks ago or beginning of the school year. So it's things that the students were already familiar with. This is like the I do part of the lesson because it's where students are learning new information just from me, the teacher. The next day I had them in live class, and I had students together as a class look at an excerpt from a core text we were reading and identify elements of voice. We talked about what techniques the writer used to make the character and story come to life. And I helped with some of that language. I gave them some choices, and then the class together curated a list of things that were specific for that text. And we talked about how we knew if the writer was effective with incorporating the use of voice or not, and how that impacted the reader's experience. And so that was easy for them because they could tell me if they liked the way the piece was written or not. And then I helped them take it a step further by why did you feel that way? Why did you like it or not like it? Yeah.
And that's so cool because often in English, from the student's perspective, it's just analyzing the author and what their message was and what were they trying to convey. And I like that you put that on its head a little bit and said, well, how did that feel to you? How did you as the reader experience this and take it in? That's really neat.
Yeah, thank you. Then later in class, I gave students a different short selection from our core text and broke students into breakout groups. And I had them repeat the similar analysis experience that we did as a whole class, but now in small groups. So now they're really doing the work in small groups. Now they don't have me to guide them and help them. However, they just practiced all that academic language and all the academic skills to be successful. So when students did their own work later in the week, they practiced the same skill by analyzing a new piece of writing on their own for voice and the author's effectiveness. And they got to apply their new skills with a fun and creative writing assignment where they got to practice using voice in their own writing and then justifying their own effectiveness as a writer. So that was really like the peak of do you understand the skill is they have to do it and then they have to analyze their own effectiveness of a writer. So that's kind of how I would use the flipped classroom model. Really just every week I focus on just a couple skills or standards and I just flip them, and that is how I do it. So start out with, using the weekly starter video as the I do, and then the class as the we do, and then they complete it on their own and show me what they learned later on in the week with their asynchronous assignments.
It sounds like it gives you an opportunity to get to those higher level thinking skills more quickly.
Yes.
And allow the students to collaborate more often as well. When we're teaching online, I've been saying this a lot lately to colleagues and peers or friends who are in brick and mortar and always transitioning to online teaching for COVID, but that you really have to distill down what it is you want your students to learn, or what the standard is that you're getting at. And you use that word curated. And it's like, yeah, you have to curate exactly what you're going to do. And that weekly starter helps kick it off. So if you're giving them the background like you did, this is voice. We know about author's voice, right? Here it is. Then you have all that class time to engage in rich conversation and get beyond that basic identifying the key term or the basics of the knowledge and move to applying it to something else and to challenging it with pros and cons or opposing views, that kind of thing. That's really awesome because I feel like that gets pushed to the back sometimes. We just try to share the information and get kids to absorb the standard or whatever it might be. And you're really getting to engage a lot more time with students applying, critically thinking about all of that. So I think that's really cool. It seems to me that this is definitely not a fad then. Can you prove it?
Yes. Using flipped classroom model is not a fad at all. Teachers who have ever taught in a brick and mortar classroom have all had the experience of having a lesson flop because of one reason or another. I taught in a brick and mortar.
Yep.
Yes, I taught in brick and mortar for 7 years and it was awesome. I loved it. And I also had some of the worst feelings ever, especially starting out, because I would be standing in front of the class teaching my lesson. I thought it all over. I thought it was going to be fine. And then I look out and there's just 30 kids staring blankly at me or messing around now and not listening, talking to each other because I did something wrong. I wasn't clear. I didn't structure it right. I wasn't scaffolding right. Or they're just really bored because I was talking at them for too long and I wasn't paying attention to letting them apply the skills and really interact. So that was a really good learning experience. And, I think a lot of teachers can empathize with that. But I've never met a human who loves to sit and be talked to for very long. It's so hard to learn that way.
Yes, right. I mean, I'm guilty of having done that in the online setting too, not just in my brick and mortar days, but for sure online where I realize, oh, now I've been talking for 20 minutes and you all haven't done anything. This is not going to work. Kids really want to be part of the conversation. Of course they do. Our students want to be active participants in our classes. And a lot of times that's their time for social interaction too. And it's their opportunity to share their voice. And they want to have a voice in class. It makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. So providing all of that teacher-centered stuff up front, like modeling assignments, showing examples, introducing new topics. It's just a way that students can pause and digest that information in their own time. Students might need to just watch that video one time through and they're like, yep, got it. But there's other kids who are like, this is new to me and I need to pause this and process it or rewatch it. They have the freedom to do that. It seems less intimidating because students don't have to commit all of that stuff to memory the first pass. And then when you actually have students in class, their time is spent interacting with and applying the skills and concepts of the week in a way that's authentic and relatable to them. So it moves this information from being theoretical to being practical and applicable to the students' lives because they're actually doing the work and engaging in those higher level thinking skills in class instead. And in an online classroom where teachers are meeting with their kids less frequently, you may, if you teach online school, only meet with your students once or twice a week, and that's not very often. So we really have to make that time count because it's really precious time. So using the flipped classroom model also provides teachers with valuable information about how students are learning and working towards proficiency because you're able to actually see if they can apply this information and work with it or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're in a unique position this year because not only are you an online teacher, but you're a mom of kiddos attending online school as well. Yes. Are your kids, your personal children's teachers using the flipped class model, and how have your kids responded to that if they are?
They are. So I have a first grader and a third grader, and they are in an online school right now that uses the flipped classroom model. And it's been really interesting, actually, because one of my kids, he actually started reading while he was in online school. And so, as a high school teacher, I'm like, how does even online school work when you have a kid that can't read or write yet? And then my older one can. But it's been really great because especially the weekly starter videos for my younger kiddo, he can pause that and process it, or he can watch and do examples along with his teacher to learn new information. So she uses the weekly starter video more as like a guided lesson. So kids are doing paper and pencil work with her on writing or using a different math strategy to solve an addition equation. And so it's like guided work. And then with the older student, it's a little bit more in depth. And so there is a lot of pausing and reviewing examples that has to happen. But it's really great because at the end of the week, they're able to really clearly articulate what they've learned. They're able to name like specific math strategies they learned this week. They've really mastered each skill by the end of the week that their teacher taught them because of this flipped classroom model.
That's awesome. It's really cool to hear how this is a sound practice that really does work K through high school. It is applicable no matter where you are, what you're doing, what grade level you're working with.
Yes.
What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of Admin Dash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. Admin Dash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use Admin Dash. For more information about Admin Dash, contact sales@syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. Well, before the break, Ashley, you gave such in-depth explanation of what the flipped classroom model is, how it can look. You even gave us elementary and high school examples. Awesome. What are the biggest challenges to student engagement in this model, and how do you meet those challenges? Because we know that happens.
Yes. One of the biggest challenges for me was moving from a brick and mortar to online teaching setting. It was really hard because I was used to, in the brick and mortar classroom, having students come to class with doing their pre-work for whatever activity I wanted to do. Mostly because I was in control of how they spent their time. I saw them every day. I could watch them read their chapters and monitor that. But in an online setting, it was really hard because I had a lot of students coming to class not doing the pre-work. And since I wasn't sitting there with them every day, watching them do their work, I couldn't really control that. And so I had to figure out how I was going to solve this problem so that I could have my classes be a good learning environment. These kids would probably watch the weekly starter video, but they were likely very behind in their other work for one reason or another. I realized really quickly that when my activities demanded that students be up to date on all of their work, my lessons did not go well at all. So I had to change the way I thought about the purpose of my class. So I worked to make my class more equitable by pinpointing the skills I was teaching for the week instead of thinking in terms of my class is about these sections of the book. So I went from like a content focus to a skill focus.
That's really interesting. I love that shift from this exact piece of content that I'm going to use, which you can still use for sure and expect kids to engage with. But when it comes time for live class, what you really care about is the skill. And that is an element of letting go of control, which we've talked a lot about this season on the podcast, sharing control with your students and then letting go of some of the control that you have, especially when you are in a brick and mortar. Like you said, you know that the kids did the pre-work because you sat there and watched them do it yesterday for 20 minutes before recess or whatever it might be.
Yes.
So you don't have that control anymore. So how can you adjust based on what you can control and what is within your scope? So I love that idea of focusing on the skill rather than the actual content that you're using for that skill. So tell us more about that. What exactly did that look like for you?
Yeah, so for example, I'll teach students how to synthesize 2 texts and have students read the 2 texts in class. It may be an excerpt from our core text plus a poem or a piece of art that's new for everyone. So I can have all students participate in class regardless on how caught up they are of their work. And the text the students have already read feels suddenly brand new again because they're looking at it with a different purpose. I also like to pull in assignments from class, so the synthesis assignments will likely be a discussion post or a reading analysis assignment that students will complete later that week anyways. So they feel like they're getting to do their homework in class, even though
that.
Yeah, they really like that. And it makes students feel successful because they already leave class with their assignment started, so they know exactly how to do it. So I can focus on skills and concepts when designing my class lesson, and that was a game changer for me. Students get a jump start on their homework, and that really increases their self-efficacy and general engagement. And they get to collaborate and engage with skills we're learning, which gives me information on how they're progressing in their learning journey so I can intervene if needed. And it's just really been a win-win for me and my students.
And I love that you tied that into equity too, because it is equitable for students that you're not necessarily expecting that they've all done precisely what you asked them to do in that precise timeline, which I know in an ideal world, we'd hope that they would, and we'd say, why not? But we don't know what got in the way of them accomplishing Monday's quote unquote homework for class on Tuesday. It's out of our control. So control what you can and engage them all. And you're providing an equitable experience for everyone. I think that's essential and really powerful. So thank you for saying that word and bringing that up. What have you been able to do with students in the flipped class model that you couldn't do before? Has it opened up any doors for activities or things that you weren't able to do before you flipped?
Yeah, it definitely has. So when I worked in a brick and mortar classroom before moving to online teaching and using flipped classroom model, prior to using the flipped classroom model, I spent most of my class time just watching students do their work. I think I talked about that earlier, but I was just telling them to do their work, repeating instructions on how to do their work. And I was so happy to do this and support students however I could. I would sit with them, help them with their writing, give them one-on-one support. It was awesome. And we did some incredible activities and had really meaningful discussions in class, and there was a lot of good learning going on. However, when I switched to using the flipped classroom model, I noticed that I was freed up from the micromanager role in the classroom to more of a coaching role. So after some practice and communication with my class, because this was really a big shift for students who are new to this model too, my students learned to take more ownership of their learning experience. They realized how to make their weekly starter video work for them by reviewing it, using it as a resource later on in the week, referring back to it when they wanted to see examples or hear a short mini lesson again. And they did their own independent work at the end of the week. And so it just really was nice because I was able to have more of like a relationship with my students as sort of side by side with their learning, like going with them and guiding them instead of just standing over them telling them what to do. And so it made it easier because students, after time passed and they learned how to work in this model, They were just becoming more independent learners and taking more responsibility for their own learning and educational experience. And that was really cool to see and a really important life skill.
Absolutely. Definitely an important life skill. And kids taking ownership of their learning is just huge,
Yes.
isn't it? Like that's the biggest thing, to get the buy-in and get them to want to own it and to engage with what they're learning. It's amazing to think that you can change this one aspect of how and when you present information, and that can enable kids to be more self-sufficient, more self-aware. And I also like that you talked about walking them through the process. We just talked with Tim Baddock a couple of weeks ago about universal design for learning, and he had mentioned he had given students choice for an assignment, and one of them was to do a podcast. But he didn't really scaffold that and tell them what a podcast, how it would work or how they could set it up. And so no one chose that activity. And so it's sort of the same thing with flipped class model. It's good to pull back the veil and say, this is exactly what I'm trying to do now. And here's how class is going to work. And I think it's going to be more fun for all of us. Here we go. I think that's good. The kids know what you're trying to do, and there's no feeling of being manipulated or anything like that. They're really just invested in it because it's fun. As it should be.
Yeah, it is fun. And it was really incredible to see, because then when students came to class, they learned to be ready to work. They came to class ready to work, ready to engage, participate. They were taking the active role, and it's their class. And they really quickly took that and they loved it. It's their class, it's not my class, and they get to do, collaborative activities and engage with what we're doing with their friends in class. And so they really looked forward to that. The students were excited to do their assignments and interact with each other and with the week's learning targets. And students like learning by doing. They like coming to class and doing stuff instead of just listening. So I felt like I was able to go much deeper with the skills I was teaching, because the flipped classroom model helped me set clear routines on how the overall structure of my class was. And students were just ready and eager to apply their knowledge and skills in different capacities throughout the week.
That is awesome. I love it. Thank you so much, Ashley. We're going to have resources in the show notes for teachers who want to try flipping their classroom if they haven't yet. So that will be really helpful guidance to those of you who are new to this, or maybe just a new idea for those of you who have been flipping, just to see some other perspectives and other takes on it. Ashley, thank you so much for your time today and all of your honest and really thoughtful insight on flipping our classes.
Thanks for having me, Natalie.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest from the past, Ashley White. I hope you enjoyed hearing Ashley's guidance on the flipped class model and that you'll try it yourself this winter. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode. In the meantime, on Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS education, head to syseducation.org. As always, this podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.